Hi, welcome back. The last time we left off after we created an environment and more precisely, an environment where we have an Apache, a MySQL, and a PHP. So we were able to have either a MAMP or XAMPP application or package on our local machines, and ideally at this stage we were able to execute some PHP scripts. Okay, in the lecture today we are gonna dig further into the PHP language. Now, due to the timing and due to the time it would take to learn a language, specifically, a programming language such as PHP, we are not going to spend a lot of time into digging deep into the language syntax itself. However, we do want to give you a PHP kind of primer and teach you the basics of the language, because eventually this course is less about PHP and more about the calligraphy framework, which happens to use the language, but it uses it in a slightly different ways that are really implemented for the framework itself, which we would spend more time on when we talk about calligraphy. But there are some basic concepts and basic notions in the language that are definitely needed for you to be able to understand either the framework code, so the calligraphy framework code, and in order for you to be able to be operational with the framework itself. This lecture, really, if we go to the GitHub again, and when you look at the outline of the different lectures, there is a section called, in lecture 4, called PHP Primer, and within this one there are lots of references to other resources elsewhere on the web that can help you, learn the details of the syntax of the language. The PHP official documentation is definitely a great place to understand further, either the syntax, the methods, or the concepts of the language. The PHP official documentation does require a little bit of a learning curve for you to know how it's structured and things like that. So maybe we could spend a little bit of time on it just to explain it to you. And probably the best way to access the PHP official documentation is to do directly a search on Google, for instance, and search for either a variable, a method name, a variable name, or a variable type, or anything of that nature. And usually the results that come out do come out from the PHP official documentation. That can be the best way to navigate through that documentation. The other meaningful resource that can be very valuable to you is really the W3 schools. So W3 schools have a great way of simplifying, the syntax or the grammar, if you want to call it this way, of any programming language, really, PHP included, and they give you the gist of it. Okay, so it's a great way to kind of learn diagonally, if I may call it this way, a programming language, and it's really what we need for the purpose of this course. Of course, if you want to learn more about it, there are lots of great resources, printed resources, so such as books and such, that can help you significantly learn the PHP language. But if you are familiar with any other object-oriented language or scripting languages, whether it's JavaScript, or if it's Java, or C++, those can help you very quickly understand the basic concepts of PHP, because PHP at the end of the day is a scripting language, so it doesn't have a compiler. It is more of an interpreted language. This is why it's very suited for the web. And at the same time, it is also an object-oriented language. I am not sure why I keep saying project-oriented. So it is an object-oriented language, which, just like Java and C++, it has the notion of classes, the notion of instantiated classes or objects that are very typical of object-oriented programming. So let's dig further into the language itself, and we're gonna go by example in here, and I'm gonna show you directly in the code how certain properties of the language can be applied. Of course, this is not going to go into the details again, but at least it will give you a functional a functional practice of the language itself. Now, before we go any further, it is good moving forward and from this point on to use an editor. Okay, why? Because you do not necessarily want to create your code in Nano from the terminal or from Vim unless you are comfortable with them. It's always to have a graphical user interface code editor, and there are lots of free ones out there on the web. I personally use Brackets, so Brackets is a great editor to use for multiple different languages. Okay, PHP happens to be one of them, but for web programming in general, and specifically if you are interested in JavaScripting as well, it is a good editor to use. So it's called Brackets, and you can download it directly from the Brackets website. There are others that you can use as well. There is Komodo Edit. There are some other editors with IDEs and stuff. If you are familiar with other programming languages, that you could also use. So I'm going to focus mainly on Brackets. I will be using Brackets throughout this course. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go back to our terminal and we're going to create a directory in our document root. Okay, so remember, if you haven't seen the previous lecture, we talked about the document root and where our application should live, so that it could be served by the Apache server. In my case, it's under a folder called Sites under Home. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new directory, a new folder that we're going to call Lecture 4, at least for the purpose of this video. Okay, and inside Lecture 4, this is where we are going to put the files that we're gonna work with. Okay, and right now let's create a file, an empty file, and let's call it a PHP practice. Okay, like that, .php. It should be a .php because that's the whole point. We want to execute those PHP scripts, so it has to be a .php extension. So I just created the file. We'll always double check by listing. So yes, we have it. It's in there. Now I will open Brackets or any code editor that you would like to use. And now in that case, it's opened on another folder. So I will go and choose the new one that we just created, which happens to be called Lecture. Okay, and I will open the whole root, and here it is, my PHP practice .php. Great. Everything we're going to do right now, we might do different methods, we might write different pieces of code in there, and we'll go and execute them directly in the browser to see the output. And I'm going to probably focus on different concepts at different times, and we'll take it from there. So I will keep referring back and forth to the documentation to make sure that at least we cover everything that the lecture reference has. Okay, so now in order to start, let's first always, and just like we always said, any PHP script or any PHP code needs to start with the PHP tags. Okay, the way you open the PHP tags is you use the tag mark, just like HTML, and then you put a question mark and then PHP, and then you end it with a question mark, and you end it with a closing tag. Okay. And don't forget to save each and every time you do a change. Let's first go back to the documentation. So the first thing we're going to talk about, and just for us to make things a little bit easier and to be able to output things on the screen. So previously we talked about a method called echo, which happens to be the second bullet point over here. So there's a method called echo that allows you to output strings. So any set of characters, if you may call them this way. Okay, a string is any set. It's a text. Okay, and the echo would allow you to output anything that is of a string type to the browser. Okay, there are other methods such as print, which does almost the same thing. It also allows you to output strings, and there are probably other methods that you might use, which I might use them here as well, that are slightly more elaborate in what they could output. Okay, there is one called var_dump or dump. okay, both of them. And dump can allow you to actually just dump any output coming from any variable, no matter what its type is. So it could be an array, it could be a string, it could be an integer. So whatever it is, it just dumps it out to the screen. This method is very helpful, specifically for debugging. Whenever you're debugging your code, always use dump, okay? Because in many cases, you might not know what the type of what you're outputting ends up being, unless of course you write perfect code and you know exactly where you're going with it, which is unlikely to happen. Okay, so in many cases, sometimes through debugging, you realize that certain variables are taking different object type, and in that case, you will need to use dump. Okay, because if you use echo, it might end up causing errors because the output is not necessarily a string. Okay, so in order to avoid all this, I would suggest that you use the dump method, which is more versatile, and it opens up the possibilities to be able to print out to the screen any sort of type. So now that we have this in mind, because this is going to help us throughout, let's go back and talk about variables in general with PHP. What you need to know about PHP, unlike any other programming language, is that the variables are agnostic to the type. Okay, the variable in PHP, you should think about it as a container. It's a container that can contain anything. Okay, it can contain an object of any type. It could be a string, it could be an integer, it could be a boolean, it could be even a function sometimes. Okay, like a name of a method, or it could be an object, or it could be a class. So it could be anything. It is a container that is completely versatile and that could point to any sort of data type. In other languages, they might call this a pointer. Okay, in PHP, every variable is a pointer. And the way to declare variables in PHP, also unlike any other programming language, the variables do not need to be declared. Okay, you could either directly assign them to their values whenever they are needed. Okay, they do not necessarily need to be declared and then assigned, just like in Java, for instance, or in other languages of that kind. In PHP, your variables can directly be declared and assigned at the same time. The way to declare a variable in PHP is it always starts with a $sign. Okay, now it does have some restrictions onto what it accepts as a naming convention. In general, variables in PHP cannot have or cannot start with numerics. Okay, they absolutely need to start with alphabet with alpha characters, and they are case sensitive. Which means, what does it mean to be case sensitive? It means if I call something my variable, okay, and if I call something else my variable with a capital M, those are considered two separate variables. Okay, always remember that PHP is very case sensitive. All right, now that we know that, now let's call my variable. Okay, and the way to assign in PHP is by using the equal operator, which is almost universal in almost any other modern programming language, and you can assign to it any data type. Okay, so if I do my variable equals to 2, then it would know that we're talking about an integer in this particular case. I could also say dot variable 1. Now let's change it, and we're going to say it's an array. And let me define it a slightly different way. We'll talk about arrays in a while, but let's create an array that has, and an array is really a collection. In this case, let's create a collection of a bunch of things. It could be, let's say, name 1. I'm going to say John. I'm going to say over here Mary. Okay, just to be more consistent, let's say it's Steve. Okay, let's say it's a collection of people. So here we are. We define two variables. One of them is more of an integer. The other one is more of an array. So now let me show you when you try and echo variable my variable 1. Okay, what happens? So you always remember the way to execute your code is always in the browser. And in our case, we called it lecture 4. And then we called our file practice PHP, I think. Or PHP practice. We'll figure that out. It might be the opposite. PHP practice. All right. Notice the error that it gives you. It gives you, it's an array to string conversion. All right. And that is exactly true. I told you already that the echo only takes strings. Okay. In this case, we defined my variable 1 to be an array. This is why our echo doesn't work. However, if I do my variable should not be a problem because it's an integer, and what PHP is going to do through the echo method, it's going to directly switch it to a string. So you're going to get a string that displays a number 2. So there's no problem into switching an integer to a string because the language does interpret that correctly. However, from an array to a string, it is always touchy. This is why I always encourage you to use dump. And in order to use dump is a method, and the way to call a method in PHP is you put the method name, and then you open a parentheses to give it arguments. In this particular case, we want to give it the argument my variable 1. So what I'm saying here is I'm telling PHP to go and dump anything that is contained within the variable my variable. All right. So now if I save and if I go back, you will notice there is no difference in here, and it's saying there is no dump. Sorry, it's var dump. Okay. Bar dump like that, and then it will give you a slightly different format, but I don't want you to worry about this. Here's your value over here. Okay. All right. So this is our one way to output to the screen. Now let's try it with the array. So let's do var dump variable 1. And now in that case, you notice that it gives you a nice format when you dump it out of the array. So the first element of the array is Steve, second element is John, and the third element is Mary. So this is really how we call a variable in PHP. Now you can create any sort of objects of your own as well. We will show you how to do that in further down, and you'll see it even more when we talk about calligraphy, because you're going to deal with objects a lot, so it doesn't have to be one of the basic data types that comes with the language. You can also create your own types as well. So it could be any object of any kind. If you want to create a class called students or a class called teachers, okay, and your variable can very much hold those objects as well. Great. So I hope this gives you a little bit of at least an understanding of how to declare a variable. Now there is something else about variable that you need to understand, and that is the scope of the variable. What do we mean by a scope? A scope is really whether or not the code is going to understand the variable when it's invoked. So let me give you an example, and for that we need to touch upon several things. If I create a function, so within this code I want to create a function. How do I do that? And this covers a little bit some other topics coming further down, but it's good to know them as we go. In order to create a function with PHP, you need to use one of the methods provided out of the box, which is called function, and we're going to call it my function in this case. And this function is not going to take any arguments. Okay, so we'll leave it empty. And the way to declare a function in any programming languages, really, mainly in object-oriented programming languages, the arguments are usually specified within parentheses. In this particular case, we don't want any arguments, so we'll leave the parentheses empty. Okay, and what we're going to do is we open the brackets. Okay, those brackets, they are somehow defining the scope of that function. So any code that is in between the brackets belongs to the function itself. Okay, so if I am to change the value of the variable within the function in here, so if I'm going to say my variable, and I'm going to put my variable is now 3. All right, and what I'm going to do here, I'm going to run that function, and in order for me to run that function, I will do my function, call it like this, and this should execute this function in here. And I'm gonna dump my variable. Now, logically speaking, in the way you are reading the code, you might think that the dump might return a 3, but you'll realize very quickly that this is not the case. So let's go in and try it out. Okay, it's a 2. All right, so this, I think, kind of illustrates very well the notion of a scope. What we did here is the scope of my variable that the dump or the var dump function is capable of reading is within the code and not within the function. So dump is not aware of what's happening in the function. So anything that the function is doing, or any declarations that are happening within the functions, declarations and assignments, are not taken into account outside of the function itself. So if I am to redeclare my variable and give it another value, it's as if this function is creating another instance of that variable with a name that is only known to the function itself. And anything that is happening outside of the function is not aware of what is happening to that variable within the function itself. Okay. Now, if I really want to change the or assign that variable to a different value, then I need to give it make it global. All right. What does it mean to make it global? By making it global, it's as if I'm saying that the variable that I'm using in here is the same as any other variable with the same name that is outside the scope of this function. So then the way to do this, you're going to say global dot my variable. And just by simply saying that, what PHP is now going to understand, it's going to go look outside of this function for another variable name that has the same name, and then it's going to assign it this new value. So now if I dump it, ideally it should give me a 3. And here we go. It is a 3. Okay, so that is exactly how PHP works. Okay, understanding the scope is very important if you want to debug, because in many cases you might run into situations where you might run out of ideas on how to call your variables, and you might need to, within functions, to create some variables on the spot to handle at least what goes into the function itself. But always keep in mind that those variables are not accessible from outside the function, and you need to do either pass it out as a return of the function in order for you to use it outside, or to declare it as a global variable. All right, so that gives you an idea on the different scopes of that a PHP variable can take. Great. So now let me get rid of this. We covered the functions a little bit, so this takes us further down into the lecture. Now let's go back to the outline and look at data types. Okay, the data types. It's always good to go there to either the PHP documentation or W3 schools to give you at least a more succinct view of the different data types. So you have strings, which is a series of alphanumeric text. It could be integers, it could be floats. Floats are usually, they're also called double in other languages. So, they could be decimals and things like that. Okay, so you have integer, you have floats. It could be a boolean. Boolean is a true or false value. Those are very handy if you just want to check if certain values have been set to a yes or to a no and things like that. Okay, so boolean can become very an effective way for you to do some quick checks on certain variables. Array, just like we saw. Object is a more of a generic object, a class used within PHP, but it's used here to determine that it could be any object that you create using a constructor. Okay, and it could be null too. Okay, null means it points to nothing. So those are the main ones that we need to worry about. There are other things such as resources and promises and things like that, which are not necessary, at least for the purpose of this course. If you want to learn more about them, even W3 Schools doesn't mention them that much, but you could go and check in the PHP documentation to go more into the details of them all. Okay. So now let's go back again to the lectures. We'll see those different data types as we build some small code together. Operators are always interesting to know, and those are again are very common across the board. What matters about the operator is that they act differently depending on which data type you're using. Okay, I'll give you an example. If you happen to use an integer, then a plus would do a sum. Okay, if you happen to use strings, then a plus would concatenate two strings together. What does it mean to concatenate? It means that it would merge them together. All right. So different operators can have different ways of dealing with certain things. W3 Schools has a great summary on what each of them does. So it kind of separates them into I think operations by type. Okay, so if you're doing arithmetic operations, things like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, percentage, and so on. So this is one type where you could use them with numeric types. So it would cover integers and doubles or floats. All right. Then you have what we call the assignment operators. Assignment operators, we just saw one together, the equal sign, which is used to assign a variable to a value. And this is an example of an assignment operator. There are others that you could use, which are some form of shortcuts or quick kind of operators, which I would like to show you because they could become very extremely handy. So what I could say here is, instead of saying my variable is equal to 2, I'm going to say my variable is always equal to whatever the variable contains, and I'm going to add 2 to it. So this is the equivalent of saying that my variable, and I will write it down because it will make it clearer, my variable is equal to my variable, so whatever value it has at the moment at runtime, and I'm going to add 2 to it. Okay? So in order for me to do that, then let me give it a default value, and let's say my variable is 10. Okay? And now when I var dump it again, what I am going to see here ideally is my variable is 10, and then my variable is whatever my variable is plus 2, so it should give me a 12. Okay, so if I go here and I do dump, and it gives me a 12. Okay, so this is exactly what such operators can help you do. It's just a way to make the syntax a little smaller. Smaller in terms of typing. I like to call them shortcuts, but if you feel that you're not comfortable enough to do things like that, then you could very much do a blown up operation of that sort over here. All right, let's go back. So those are the assignments. Then we have some other type of operators that are made for comparison purposes. So what does it mean to compare? It means are they equal? Are they of the same type? So if you want to compare if two integers, for example, are the same, two variables have the same value in terms of and if they're integers, then in that case you would use the equal sign. This will return true if variable x is equal to variable y in this particular case. Okay. Now there's a difference between equal and the triple equal. Okay. The triple equal not only returns true if the two variables are equal in value, but it also returns true if they have the same type. So let me give you an example, and let me go to the code. And let me now change my variable 2 and set it to 12 in this particular case. Okay, but I'm going to put 12 as a string like that. Okay, now what I'm gonna var dump, I'm gonna var dump the equal of the two variables. So it's gonna check if those two variables are equal, my variable and my variable 1. And if they're equal, it's gonna return a true or a 1. That's the equivalent of the var dump might not return true. It might tell you 1 or 0. 1 means it's true, 0 means it's false. Okay, so now my variable and my variable 1, they are equal. So it's returning true. Why are they equal? Because their values are the same regardless of their type. Okay, we have a 12 and a 12 even though one of them is a string. However, if I do equal, now I'm doing an additional check. I'm asking the system not only to tell me whether they have the same values, but to also check if they have the same type. So now in that case, it also did return a true, because maybe I am var dumping, and this one is returning a true, right? False. Probably I did not refresh. I hesitated a little bit about my knowledge, but then I'm like, no, I must be right. So as you can see, probably I didn't save. It returned a false. All right, let's do it again just to double check. So when I do equal and I check it, should return a true. Now when I do a double check to check the type, make sure you save. Don't do the same mistake that I did. And then I refresh, now it returns a false. Why? Because they are not of the same type. Yes, they do have the same value, but they do not have the same type. So this is the distinction between equal and the triple equal. Now, if you want to check if they're different, not identical, then you would use the exclamation mark along with the equal. That's one way of doing it. There's another representation of it that does exactly the same, is by using the greater than and smaller and less than signs. This is another way to represent exactly the same thing and to check if they are not identical or not equal in value. So remember, when you use these two operators, it's checking the values, not the type. Okay, in order to check both the value and the type, you need to use exclamation mark with a double equal. Okay, that's if you want, it's the reverse comparison than the triple equal. Okay. Now you could also definitely check if it's less than or equal, greater than and equal, or you could use the spaceship mechanism, and that is to check if they're either less than or greater than. Okay, so this is checking a range. So these are the comparison operators. Then we have what we call the incremental operations, or the increment-decrement operations. Let's say, and this can become very handy if you're using loops, and we'll see loops in a while. If you want to always increment my variable, and let's use my variable, yeah, this is my variable, and you want to say, I want to increment it by 1. You would do plus plus, like that, okay? When you do plus plus like that, now my value should be a 13. So let me dump it again. My value, if you remember well, it's not a 12. Now it should be, I incremented it by 1, should give me a 13. Okay? So 10 plus 2, and then incremented by 1 gives you 13. So those are what the increments are. Now, there is a subtle nuance. Sometimes you can put them before, and sometimes you can put them after. The difference between the two is actually very subtle, depending on whether you want to print when you want to get the value before you increment or after you increment. In our case and in our example, it doesn't matter whether you put it before or after, because you are anyway dumping after the declaration of the variable. Some cases, specifically when you're doing loops, and we'll see that in a while, you might want to increment the value before you start using it. And in that case, you would put it before. If you want to increment the value after you use the default of it, then you would do it. You would put it after. I would probably recommend that you don't worry that much about it. This will become more more pertinent and more meaningful when you're dealing with it in a context, in the context. But usually, depending where you place that incrementation in the code, will make the difference. Okay, and by that is what I mean is wherever you place this whole statement will make the difference for you, as opposed to knowing whether to place it before or after. So I don't want you to worry that much about it, for as long as you know that there is a shortcut for incrementing by 1, and that is either the plus plus, and for decrementing by 1, that would be the minus minus. All right. Now there are other, there are also operations. There are operators in their own way. We call them logical operators. They are mainly used whenever you're dealing with Boolean. Okay, so if you want to check if two conditions are happening at the same time, you might want to use the AND. Okay, so if my variable is true, my variable 1 is true, and my variable 2 is true, then return true. That you would use the AND. Okay, you might want to compare, not compare, but rather say if it's one condition or the other, then in that case you would use the OR, then you have the XOR, and there are other representations for each one of those. You can either use the AND like that, or you could put a double ampersand, and that would give you, exactly the same thing. All right. The other one are the string operators. In order to concatenate to string, which means merge two texts together, you would use the dot, the dot sign over here. So if you do dot text1, that's a variable name. With dot text2, that would merge text1 and text2 together. You could also do operators on arrays. So if I do, let me go back to the code. I don't have the array anymore, but let's create it again. So let's do this as an array, like that. And we say, let's say it's a 20, like that. And let's say it's a 21. Don't forget to put, you don't need to, but don't forget to do that. And let's create another my variable 2, and let's do 24 and then 25. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do my variable 1 plus my variable 2. And let's look at the output together. All right. It didn't work the way I wanted it because I do not have anything in common. So what the plus does, it will check the intersection between the two arrays. What does the intersection mean? It's the common elements. So if you notice, I have 12, 20, 21, and 24 and 25. By doing the plus, I am looking for the intersection or the union between the two. Well, there is none. Okay, but if I put 24 in the first one, and now if I dump it out, now I also get I get the entire union, including the 24. All right, let's go to similar. All the other operators such as equal, still apply to the arrays to compare the values in them, and so on. Okay, the conditional assignments, I would tell you not to worry about them just yet. Okay, we are going to see them when we talk about calligraphy, and we start seeing those expressions in a more in the context. It would be a lot easier to understand them. But what these are doing are just shortcuts in order to make certain if conditions. And if conditions, we're going to see them together. Whenever you're checking for certain values, it would make the syntax a lot smaller. So let's go back to the lecture now. Let's talk about conditionals. All right, so it's a great segue. So conditionals. Let's go here and check. How do we check if this variable is equal to a certain value, for example? So what the syntax is, you would put an if. You would open the bracket, so any condition that you want to check for would be in between the parentheses, and then you open the brackets. The brackets, anything that goes in there will get applied only if this condition is met, whatever is in between the parentheses. In our case, we want to check if variable 1 is equal to 10. Now remember the operators. So if my variable is equal to 10, then I want to say, let's echo something, hello world. Okay? Now, what happens if it's not a 10? We got to define what happens if it's not a 10. We're going to say echo bye-bye world. Don't forget to put semicolons after each and every statement, okay? Except when it's conditions or functions. So, what this is going to do is going to check my variable. If my variable is equal to 10, it's going to do hello world. If it's not equal to 10, it's going to do bye-bye world. Now, in our case, our variable is not a 10, it's a 12. So it has somehow to echo bye-bye world on my screen. Bye-bye world indeed, okay? Great. So now let's bring it one value down in order to get the 10, in order to see how it would behave when it goes in there. So now ideally it's 8 plus 2, and it should give us a 10. Actually no, because we're incrementing in here again by 1. So let's put a 7, and now it should give us the 10 that we want, and we get hello world. All right. So those are the if statements. There's nothing more to it, by the way. You can do if, else, or else if. So I could do else if like that. Don't forget to close the bracket. That's if you want to check for different conditions several times. Okay, so I could do if it's 10, then output something. If it's 11, then echo still a hello world. And if it's something else, then in that case, output bye-bye world. So over here, if I put 8 now, the total should give me 8 plus 2 and then plus plus, that would be an 11. It should give me still a hello world, okay? So those are nested conditions, and you can nest the conditions as much as you want, meaning you can validate different conditions within the scope of this if and the up until it reaches the else, okay? Or even you can nest within. So if it's variable 10, and then within variable 10, you could do some other conditions in there. In this case, it doesn't apply because it's very, we're talking about integers here, so it's not a big deal. But if I say if it's, for example, if it's a value that is greater than 10, then I want, well, actually, let's put less than 10 in here. If it's less than 10 or equal, check in there if it's an 8. So I'm going to do if my variable is an 8, then in that case, echo yay, and then it's going to continue executing the rest, and it's going to say hello world, okay? So if it's an 8, so pretend, follow my cursor, pretend the system's going to go in there, it's going to check, is my variable less or equal to 10? Yes, it is. Go in. Is it equal to 8? Yes, it is. Go in. What do? Echo yay. So I'm going to print out yay, and then I'm going to go back and execute what's out there and say hello world. So ideally it should say yay hello world if it's 8. So let's get it to get us an 8 value. In order to do that, I need to put a 5. So 5 plus 2 plus 1 is an 8, and ideally it should say yay hello world. Let's see if that gives me what we want. Exactly. Yay hello world. Okay, so all this to show you that they could be nested within. Great. So that gives us the conditionals. There are other ways to do the conditionals using what we call switch cases. Switch cases is just another syntax to do exactly the same thing. Switch cases are more, I'm not going to say more interesting than the if and the else. The if and the else are easier to understand than the switch cases. The switch cases, though, are more structured, and they allow you to have a better readability of the code. So if I want to do the same thing, instead of saying if my condition, I'm going to check my variable. I'm going to say, I'm going to switch my variable, okay, and I open the brackets. What this is going to say is go check my variable. That's exactly what it's saying. And in case my variable is less or equal to 10, I'm going to execute some code here. And this is the way, by the way, to add comments in PHP. You put slash slash. If it's a multi-line, you would put slash. It would be, multi-line would be like this. And you end it. You start it with a slash and a star, and you end it with a star, so this is a multi-line. Okay? You use one or the other, not both at the same time. So in case it's less than or equal to 10, you would execute some form of a code here, and you always end it with a break. Okay? Which means break means take me out of this case. Now, in case it's something else, let's say it's in case it's 12, again, you would execute some code. In this case, let's say echo hello, and then break. And then you would always have what we call a default, which is the equivalent of the else. So anything else, meaning the default, echo by world. And of course, break after that. This is doing exactly the same thing when I do echo hello world. And this one should say, if it's an 11, we said, just to make them consistent, it should say still a hello world. All right. So now you're going to see them executing twice. So we're going to see yay. Well, actually, depending on the values that we put, let's put a 10. No, let's put an 8. So 5, 2, and 1 is an 8. So over here, we should have one output that says yay, hello world, and then followed by hello world, because it's less than 10. Nope, we have a problem. Yes, of course we do. Sorry, you gotta say my variable less than or equal to 10. Okay, so what do we have? Yay, hello world coming from the first if-else statement, and the second one is hello world. All right? So this is another way. As you can see, it makes the code more readable, but it's exactly doing the same thing. And this covers our conditionals, a brief summary. That's what conditionals are about. Now let's go and create for loops. For loops or loops in general. There are two ways of creating loops. You can either use the for loop or the while loop. I would suggest to use the for loop because it's, again, more readable than the while loop. If you want to learn about the while loop, W3 Schools does it beautifully for you, okay? But let's go and create a for loop together. So let me just get rid of all this. We don't need it anymore, okay? And loops means I am going through each and every item in a list or in a collection, okay? Usually they're used with arrays or objects. Later on we'll see that, but usually through arrays, which means I want to go through the different items, and I'm going to iterate through each and every one of them. That's one usage of it. Another usage of it is if you want to execute the same code several times. Okay, so I want to go 3 times and echo, I don't know, hello world 3 times. How do I do that? So let me start with the second case, and then we'll go back to iterate in an array. The way to do it, you would say for, and then in between you need to specify the starting point, the condition to stop, and the ending point. Let me explain that. So I would say if my variable, and in order not to confuse it with the s, let's call it iterator. So $i, and I want $i to start at 0. And I want to increment, check before incrementation, I want to check if my I is less than 3, not less than or equal, less than 3. So it goes 0, then it increments to 1, then it increments to 2, and bang, it stops after that. It goes out of the loop and it stops executing anything that's within the brackets of the loop. And what do I want to do when this condition is reached? Or until this condition is reached, what I want to do is I want to increment my I by 1. Okay? So this is saying continue incrementing I by 1 until you hit 3. And it's never going to hit 3. When it hits 3, it never executes the code, so it stops at 2. So what do I want to do in here? I want to echo hello world, just like that. Okay, I will remove the var dump in here because we don't need it anymore. And what this is going to go, it's going to go 3 times into this loop, and it's going to echo hello world. So ideally, we should see hello world 3 times. Hello world, hello world, hello world. Okay? So that's one way of using the loop. Another way of using a loop would be on an array again, or a list, and that's the first one I talked about. So how do we do this? What we're going to say is for each, there's a slight difference between for and for each. For each $my variable, because we know it's a collection, my variable 1, sorry. So for each item in my variable, and you need to say what exactly you're looking into that item. I'm looking into a key and a value. What does a key and a value mean in the situation of an array? A key is really the index of where this item is positioned. So if I say key 0, that would be my 12. Key 1 would be my 28. Key 2 would be my 21, and so on and so forth. So what I'm telling the for each here is I'm telling it for every item within the variable, get me both the key and the value. Okay? And echo the key for me, which means print it out, and then echo the value. Let's put like a dash between them. And over here, I'm using concatenation, if you remember well. By doing the dot, I am merging a variable with a dash with another variable, which would be the value. So what I am telling the system to do, I'm telling it for each and every item, get the key, put a dash, and print the value. So ideally, we should see 0-12, 1-20, 2-21. Okay, now in order to make this more readable, I am also going to echo at the end of each one a new line. Why a new line? Because I want them to be on separate lines each and every time, so it would just become more readable. Okay, so it's just one way of doing things. So let's go there. 0-12, 1-20, 2-21, 3-24. Now I didn't put them on in a new line. So let me do this. Let's do a break, okay? Which is a regular HTML break. Now you get them, okay? 0-12, 1-20, 2-21, 3-20, 24. All right, so this is the way to iterate in an array. Now there is something else you could do. If you really don't need the key or don't need the value, you could choose. So you can say, I just want to get out of this iteration, I just want to get the value. So now key has no meaning at all. And I do echo.value. Now I'm only going to get the values in here. All right, that is another way. In many cases, you might not need the index. You just need the item that you're iterating through. And in that case, there's no need to say $key and value. Okay, you would just get the value itself. Now, there are a bunch of methods that could be applied on arrays in general. And PHP is known for doing a great job at manipulating lists and collections in general. And I would strongly advise you to go to the PHP documentation about the arrays in order for you to know the methods within an array. So probably the best way to do this, and I will show you because I promised that I will. If I do PHP arrays like that, or array without an S, you can go again. W3 Schools is one of them. If not, you can go to the PHP documentation, which is usually under php.net. Okay, so if you go in there, and this is really the PHP documentation. I'm not going to tell you that it's very easy to read. It's not always very easy to read, but it tells you a little bit, you know, what the array type is about. It can show you some examples of how it could be used, you know, and this is a collaborative environment, so a lot of users do actually mention ways or show some of their own code in there. Okay, and then the most important part is really to know the methods on this. So if you look at the right hand side over here, I mean, it gives you some other references onto what can be done with arrays. And let me go maybe in here in the introduction. Okay, in the introduction, it always helps to see the different types and so on. Now, again, it is not always very easy to identify yourself in there, but again, I would strongly suggest, if you know exactly what you're looking for, to search for it in Google, and then it would tell you, it will point you to the right point in the documentation where it does that. So let me go back to google.com. There's something called array merge in PHP. So if you do array merge PHP, you can get to the array merge in W3 Schools again, or you could go directly to the manual. If you go to the manual, over here it's describing the function, and really all the function references are under a section called function reference. This is the area that I want you to keep an eye on. The function reference can give you all the methods that you can use on any data type that you want across PHP. Okay, it is very helpful, specifically if you want to know more about what can be done. But if you are able to find one method in a particular data type, such as for strings, for example, array merge or apply to arrays, I said. Array merge applies to arrays, and now if you look at the right hand side, it gives you all potential other methods that can be used on arrays, and this is really extremely valuable. Okay, you can look at array functions as well. So from the moment you start grasping how the documentation works, the breadcrumbs can help you significantly identify where in the documentation you can find certain things, and it's always good to go and take a look at the functions themselves or the methods in order for you to know what method to use on arrays. In many situations, you might tend to go and code everything yourself manually. And it's an advice, whenever you're dealing with data types that are provided by a language, always go and check what functions or what methods are provided to you, so that you don't do things that are already there, and most likely they have been programmed in a better way than how you would do it. So make sure you would use these methods that are provided to you out of the box, because one, they are very performant, and two, they might have covered more use cases than what you would do on your own. Okay, there are functions for each and every data type, so please go and check them out and read about them. Particularly for arrays, I would strongly recommend that you look at the array functions themselves and go read about them in order for you to know how to manipulate them. All right. Now with that, let's go back in here a little bit, and I think this would cover it. There are other things that you might want to go look at. Function declaration, we did it. I would strongly encourage you to go read about it in W3 Schools to know more. But if you don't want to do that, I mean, from the moment you understand that a function has a scope and a function has arguments and a function can be declared, then you understood the gist of it. Okay, when we talk about calligraphy, we're going to cover more how to create classes, how to create objects, and how to create methods within classes and methods within objects, and how to refer to them. When we get to calligraphy, things will become a lot easier to grasp, because we'll have a context to work with that would make it a lot easier for grasping the syntax. For the time being, all that you need to know is there is something called functions or methods. Some of them you can create on your own by doing something like this, and some of them are provided to you by PHP out of the box, and these you can go and check in the documentation. With that, I hope this helps you. Of course, I can't say that after this lecture you're going to be an expert in PHP. Of course not, and the point is not to become an expert in the language, but rather the point is to understand at least the basic syntax in order for you to become more operational and more dependable when you look at calligraphy and the calligraphy framework. With that, I wish you an excellent day, and hopefully in the next lecture we are going to learn about MySQL. We're going to do something very similar to what we did here, but we're going to see it in using another language and another world, and we'll do it with MySQL. With that, have a great day, and thank you for your time.